Hey, thanks for tuning in. This is the third video in the series, How to Design a Telecaster in Fusion 360. These are step-by-step tutorials, so you don't need to be a Fusion expert to get a lot out of this. But if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. I will reply. And you know the drill. Press the subscribe button if you want to see more of these videos. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. In this video, we'll create a smooth transition from the heel to the neck in this area right here. And I'm going to use a technique that I call the draped line lofting. This technique was pioneered by Brad Anderson, and I'll leave a link to his video in the description below. So the first step in this is to identify a transition point. Where does this transition end on the neck? So in order to do that, I have a piece of the plan as a canvas, and I'm going to bring that in. So I'm going to activate my neck component, and I'm going to go to Insert Canvas and my plans, and let's see if I can find it here. Tele-heel trans. Okay, so I'm going to insert that, and I will put it on this plane right here. And I'm getting an error that says your canvases are hidden, so I'm going to unhide that and do an OK. So now I have a new canvas, and it's already named based on the file name, Tele-heel transition. So let's zoom in a little bit, and you can see that it's actually upside down. This is the top of the fretboard, and this is the transition area. So what I want to do is right-click on the canvas, do an edit, and then I can come down in the dialog box and flip it horizontally. Let's see, I want to flip it. Actually, I want to rotate it. So I'm going to rotate it around this way, 180 degrees, and then I'm going to flip it horizontally, and that is now upside down from what I need. Sorry, let me flip that vertically. Okay, that's what I need. I need this transition area to match the heel. But the second issue is this is way too small. So I'm going to do an OK, and I'm going to come back in, right-click, and do a calibrate. And you'll see that I purposely left a dimension in here, even though it's kind of inverted and upside down. I can still read it. It's 3.438. So I purposely left that in specifically for calibration. So I'm in my calibrate tool. I'm going to click here. I'm going to move over to the other end of the arrow and click there, and then type in my dimension, which is 3.438. Okay, so now that should be scaled appropriately. And now we want to move it, so I got to go back in, right-click, edit canvas, and we can move this and align it to the end, and then move it vertically. And keep in mind that we have a fretboard on the top here. So I'm going to just align that so that the bottom of the fretboard aligns to the top of the neck. Okay. So now you can see we've scaled this up, and we do have a transition point, which I would say is right about here. So I'm going to OK out of that. So the next thing I want to do is make a construction plane at that point where I think the transition stops. So again, I'm in my neck component. That's where the construction plane is going to go. I'll unhide my construction plane folder and then hide the fret 1 and fret 12 and create an offset plane. So the plane is going to be offset from this plane, the end of the heel. And then I'm going to push this in. And I'm just going to look at the side profile here and manually move this to where I think the transition stops. So I've got a value here that I'm just going to round up to say 3.33. We'll make it 4 1/3 inches from the end of the heel. Okay, so now that we have that, we really don't need the canvas anymore. So I'm going to hide all the canvases. And a word about these construction planes. They can actually be resized, which has no effect on their functionality at all. But you can see I'm grabbing a corner, or I can grab an edge, and I can resize that. I find that kind of handy. It's a little easier to work with them if they're not huge, if they're just kind of tight around what you actually want to use them for. So we want to use this plane basically to create a line on this neck that we will eventually do some splines and then use those splines to do this lofting technique. So I'm going to use a feature called split face. And this neck area is what I want to split. And the splitting tool, which I'm selecting now, is the construction plane. So if I OK out of that, I can actually hide my construction plane now. I don't need that anymore. And I've established the transition point, the end of the transition, essentially. OK, so the next step is to create a series of lines that are evenly spaced on top of the heel, and then use a project feature to drape them down onto the neck. So in order to make the lines, we'll make a new sketch. So I'm going to unhide my sketches here, the main level folder, but I'll hide the other ones. And you know what? I'm actually going to show my heel sketch and because that's what we want. I've got a rectangular heel sketch here that was used to make the entire heel before we did this edge fillet. So let's make a new sketch. I'm going to pre-select this surface right here and go to create sketch. And now I need to make these lines essentially on top of this heel. So in order to do that, I'm actually going to hide the body. It's kind of getting in the way now. But I want to use these lines, which are coming from another sketch. So I actually have to do a P for project. And now I'm going to select the geometry that I want to project into the sketch that we are inside of right now. So I'm clicking on all of these lines here, and I'll do an OK. And now we can hide that heel sketch. And this is the sketch we're working with. So this is what got projected in, which is essentially the outside of the neck, but it doesn't have the round over on the end. So now I want to create these 5 lines, and I can do it right inside this sketch. So I'm going to click on my line tool, and I want one right down the middle. So I am just hovering over this end line until I get the triangle, which designates the midpoint, and then I'm going to move out. Now you see that I get this little triad here. The reason I got that is I was in 3D sketch mode. So I'm going to switch my tools back and forth, which if you toggle in or out of 3D sketch mode, you have to do that to get it to go back to the regular mode. We will be using 3D sketch, so I'll explain that in a few minutes. Okay, so I'm going to start with a line here at the center point, and now I can go to this point, but I want to go beyond because I'm going to drape these lines beyond the transition point. And I guess it would be a good idea to actually see that transition point again. So let's go and turn our transition back on in the construction folder. Okay, so as long as I go past that, we're good. And I'll accept that line. These 2 outside lines are easy enough. I can conform to the outer line on the edge of the neck. And here's a 3rd line. I'm clicking here and I'm clicking there. Okay, so now we want to do 2 lines kind of inside, midpoint of those 3 lines that we just did. The first thing I'm going to do is align these 3 points. So let's look at this straight from the top. And I will get my horizontal vertical constraint. Click on one point and the next. And now you can see a constraint pops up. Then I'll click on this point and the next. Now all 3 are vertical. And the reason I did that was I'm going to go to my line tool and turn on construction. And I'm going to start specifically in the center and go up to this point and then do another line from the center out. And the reason I'm doing that is now when I hover over this line segment, I'm getting a midpoint, which is what I want. I also want a midpoint over here, and I'm not seeing one. So I'm going to make the same construction lines from the midpoint to the outside. Okay, so now I should get a midpoint here and a midpoint here. So that's all I need to make this line. And again, midpoint here to midpoint on this construction line. And the only problem is I was in construction mode. So I'm going to hit escape to get out of my line tool. And then I'm going to click and shift click on these two lines and turn off construction, which you can do with an X shortcut key, or you can click on this in the dialog box. So I now have the 5 lines. They exist in a sketch. So I'm going to finish my sketch. And let's go ahead and turn the neck body back on so that we can see what's going on here. So we have 5 lines hovering above the neck. And now what I want to do is I want to drape those lines down onto the neck. I actually have to do this in a new sketch. So let me rename the sketch that we just did. I'll slow double click on it, and I'll call this heel lines. Those are our trans lines. Okay, now I'm going to make another sketch. This is actually going to be what's called a 3D sketch. It doesn't matter what plane is selected. So I think this is the plane that got selected, but it really doesn't matter because we're going to be doing kind of a 3D operation. We're going to drape these lines down onto the neck. So I'm going to go into my Create menu and go down to Project Include and go down to Project to Surfaces. Now in this dialog box, the first thing it asks you for faces. So I want the heel, and I also want the neck, and I want this portion of the neck also. Okay, so those are the 3 faces that I want to drape to. And now I have to select my curves, which are my 5 lines. So I'm clicking on all 5 lines, and I've got 5 selected here. My projection type is a long vector. I want to project it straight down. So I also have to select a projection direction, despite the fact that it's already got an arrow that's pointing in the right direction. But anyway, little oddity in Fusion. Okay, so now I've got my projection direction selected. I can now do an OK. And if I hide this heel lines, what you'll see is the new lines got projected onto the top of the, well, actually the bottom of the heel and onto the bottom of the neck here. Okay. So let's go ahead and slow double click on that, and we'll call this heel lines projected. Okay. Now, the purpose of projecting those lines is really to get these points right here on the neck. So, in this same sketch, what I'm going to do, first I'll turn off our construction plane, get that out of the way. I'm going to use a spline tool, but I'm specifically going to go into 3D Sketch. And let me toggle between tools so that 3D Sketch enables itself. Because I want to go from this point to this point and this point to this point. So I'm not working on a plane. I'm working out in 3D space. But I still want to be very careful that I get an intersection here and an intersection here. Okay, and then I can click on the check mark. So right now these splines are straight, but we're going to make these tangent to the neck. One side of it's going to be tangent to the neck. So we'll come back and do that next. But first I want to be real sure I intersect here and intersect here and then hit the check mark. Okay, so we've got to connect all of these points. So that's the third one. I'll orbit over to the other side. Doesn't matter which side I go from. Hit the check mark there. And here's the final one. Okay. All right, so now we have these 5 splines, which are basically just straight lines right now. But I'm going to go into the tangent constraint, click on each one of these lines, and then click on the extension of that line on the neck. And you see we got a nice transitional curve there. So again, I'll do that here. Click here and there. click on this center line and the center line extension. Come around to the other side. I'll click here and its extension, and then click here and its extension. So now we have, if this was filled in, you can kind of see, you can kind of anticipate what this transition is going to look like. So at this point, we can get out of the sketch, and I'm going to go to my Surface tab now. So what we're going to do is a surface loft. It's not a 3D body, it's just a surface, but it's going to conform from this line to this line. So I go to my loft feature. I'm in my profiles here. So I'm going to click on this line and this line, and you can see it sort of filled in, but it's a little bit improper right there, but we're going to fix that. We're going to come back and add some rails. So I'm going to click on the next profile, which is right here, and then the fourth one, and the fifth one here. Okay, so you can see that we've kind of got it filled in. Now let's go down to the rails, and the rails are this rail right here, and I think we might have to do this in two pieces. We have a curve here, which is actually generating an error, but I think that's going to go away if we click on the other side as well. And it did. Okay. So now you can see we have filled that in, and it's a very nice transition from heel to neck. Okay, so I can do an OK to get out of that dialog box. And now we're still in the Surface tab. We have some open areas here. So these can be patched. So I'm going to use the patch tool, and I'm going to make sure enable chaining is turned off, and I'll click here, here, and here, and you can see that filled in. So I'll do an OK, and then I'm going to come around to the other side and do the same thing. Patch, and select these three lines. Doesn't matter what order you do it in. And click OK. Now you probably noticed on this side that it's not the wood surface. So basically, if that bothers you, you can go to Modify and Reverse Normal. So it's going to flip this surface so that it's showing wood on one side and this kind of orangey color on the other side is supposed to be the interior. So I'm going to reverse normal and select that surface and do an OK, and then you can see that that is now our wood grain. Okay, but this is not a solid model. So if we go back to our solid tab and look at our bodies, we've got a neck body, and then we've got these other three bodies, which are all surfaces. They're not solid. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is stitch these all together so we just have a single body. So back in the Surfaces tab, I'm going to just do my selection through all three of those. And you can see over in the browser that all three are highlighted. And then I do a stitch and an OK. And now in the browser, you're seeing that there's a single body. It's still a surface body, but it's just one piece now. It's stitched together. Okay. Now, if we turn the neck back on, the question is, how do we make this into a solid body? And the first thing that I've attempted to do in the past is to stitch this. But if you do that, you get this red error message, and it's saying that this stuff cannot be stitched. So I'm going to cancel out of that. And you really have to understand why it can't be stitched. If I hide that, you'll see this is all a solid body here. I can hide it and show it, and you'll see that's all one piece. So we have to cut away some of these surfaces so that we can attach the other surfaces to it, the surfaces in this body. So when I'm in the Surface tab, I can click here, here, and here. I'm actually shift clicking. And I can delete those surfaces and open up a hole in the solid body. And so the solid body just became a surface body. If I hide the other piece, you can see now it's in a state that it can be successfully stitched. So if I highlight all of that, basically I'm just selecting these two bodies right here. I will stitch it together. There's no errors showing. And now I have a single body. So I do have a solid body. So I'll go back to my solid tab. So basically that is the transition. So let's do a quick timeline review. I'm going to rewind our timeline back to this point right here where we did our round over on the end of the heel. That's where we left off in episode 2. So the first thing we did, let me show our canvases. First thing we did was we brought in a canvas, which is this side profile of the neck. And you know, we positioned it and scaled it appropriately, but there it is right there. That allowed us to identify a transition point, and we used that sketch to create a plane. And actually, I'm going to rename this. We didn't do that. So this timeline review gives you a nice chance to fix some issues. So I'm going to call this heel trans. So we'll know what that is. Okay, so the next step was to create this transition plane. And then we actually used that plane. Let me go ahead and hide the canvas. We used that plane to do a split face, which essentially just draws a line on our face, but it drew it all the way across this profile of the neck. So let me hide our construction plane. And next we did a sketch that was 5 lines on top of the bottom side of the heel here, evenly spaced. And then we used those lines and actually projected them downward onto the neck. And at the same time, we did splines to connect this transition, this transition endpoint to our heel. And then we went into the Surfaces tab, after making them tangent, I should say. We went into the Surfaces tab and did a loft across all of these splines. And then, did our stitching operation of the 3 pieces here. Oh, I'm sorry. We actually did we did this fill in, this patch of this side. Then we patched the other side, and then we did a reverse normal on this side to get it to look like our same kind of wood treatment. Stitched those 3 pieces together, and then we had to delete some of the surfaces on the inside of the neck in order to be able to stitch the whole thing up. And then when we hide our sketches, you can see that we've got our completed transition.